As we heard this morning, there's a lot of opportunity to address broadband gaps, but first comes an understanding of what's possible. Let's talk about what's possible, how concurrent broadband access and technology adoption planning and implementation programs can lead to durable results. We talked before today about doing and planning for what the future could look like at the same time, and kind of iterating around what's possible in local communities makes a big difference. So I'd love for you to share some of the examples and to dive in. Cindy, if you'll share the sequence of events that the state library focused on, including the 2009 BTOP funding, which I think was your initial effort, bringing us all the way up to present day. And then I'll turn it over to Molly.
Cool, thank you so much, and thanks for having me here today. Before I start off, if that's okay, I just kind of poll the audience real fast, because I'm a librarian and I need to know how many library lovers there are out there. So could I just get a show of hands, how many of you, not that you love your library, but that you've been to your local library in the past month? That's okay. Here's an opportunity. The past year? Okay, gold standard, can anyone produce their library card? Oh, nice. All right, here we go. Okay, you get high fives afterward. Awesome. Okay, and now, sort of to lead into the answer to your question is, how has anyone actually, can you remember if you actually used a computer, your first computer at the library? Did anyone get introduced to a computer at your local library? Thoughts? Okay, maybe it was just the car Cadillac. It's all right. So the point to that is that libraries have been in the technology game for a long time. When we got our Grants Foundation funding across the United States, libraries began installing public computer stations and implementing internet infrastructure. So there are librarians probably in your communities that can tell you great stories of when the internet first came to their library. So the state library has been a huge partner in actually facilitating that infrastructure and that funding throughout Texas libraries, especially since 2004, and then again in 2008 and 2009 with the BTOP grants. So that was the Broadband Opportunity Grant. Broadband something T Opportunity Grant. There's so many acronyms. So we have had an investment in making sure that libraries are connecting their communities to internet for quite a while. As we have become more understanding that libraries are the central and the community anchors to our communities, we needed to double down and make sure that librarians are also invested in making sure that they're skilled and understand the needs of their communities as well. So while in 2013, we actually were not, TSLAC had an unfortunate interaction where we lost a lot of funding, and we had to close our regional systems. And those regional systems actually provided technology support for library staff. So that actually gave us an opportunity to double down on providing technology assistance, training, and ensuring that library staff and their communities have the skills needed to make sure that their communities are connected. So some of those opportunities were, my colleague Henry Stokes is our E-rate consultant, and he ensures that libraries across Texas have access to E-rate consulting to get discounts in their broadband. We also do training programs like the You Can Do IT training program, specifically for rural librarians to better understand their infrastructure. We're also currently running 2 pilots. One is a telehealth initiative with 4 libraries in Texas, and another one is a Digital Navigators Grant program with 10 libraries. So I just want to sort of iterate that there's been a lot of investment for libraries, and if you haven't had an opportunity to check out your local library and ask them about the technology they're using, you'll know that there is a need, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for connecting patrons with technology. So it's a really important and exciting time for library staff, because libraries have been not only technology providers, but digital literacy providers too. And I'll hand it off to Molly, because I can probably get excited about libraries all day.
Perfect. Thanks, Cindy. And again, really excited to be here today and talk a little bit about United Ways of Texas and the work of our local United Ways across the state, specifically on the issues of digital inclusion. So as background, so United Ways of Texas, we're the voluntary state association for local United Ways that are based in every community across the state. So our 65-ish members represent kind of the geography and diversity of Texas. They're rural, urban, suburban, representing almost every zip code in the state. And across the board, digital inclusion is a priority in our network. No matter kind of the size or the scope or the priorities that our United Ways are working on, digital inclusion is key. And for many of them, the pandemic was really that, turning point in this work, that they were really able to see kind of the disparities within their communities and also how the digital divide affected all of the programming that was happening. And so that really made it bubble to the surface for United Ways of Texas as our state association. We really work on the policy advocacy state level structure work that supports what's happening on the ground. And so at United Ways, there's usually 4 key areas they work in: education, health, financial stability, and community strengthening. And I think, as you've heard all day, broadband cuts across all of those issues in very profound ways. And so we came to the work because we had to integrate it into our programs and services and policies that we were thinking about at the state level. And what we learned kind of in that experience was that we have to think of this work holistically, that the work of infrastructure and of inclusion is intertwined in ways that make it really hard to untangle and to just do an inclusion program or this program. There are multiple barriers that our communities are facing when they're looking to access the internet, and that if we're not tackling all of those barriers simultaneously, we can build it, but people won't come unless they have all the other pieces to the puzzle. So that's really been our focus. That realization led us to Digital Texas and the coalition with many people in this room, really working on broadband advocacy at the state level. And our focus there was really, we wanted to ensure that our state legislation, our state conversations included focus on adoption, access, and use. Those key pillars of digital inclusion that we've heard about today, we wanted to make sure that when we were starting to build out this program statewide, that we were thinking about all of these issues simultaneously. For our United Ways, adoption is still kind of their key focus area in terms of what programs they're supporting, what work that they're pushing kind of as a statewide policy framework. And it's really in 2 key areas. And we've heard a lot about affordability today. It's very key for United Ways. United Ways does a lot of basic needs, support in communities. So making sure the internet's affordable. We know income's correlated with internet use. It's correlated with broadband subscription services. So thinking through that. And going to share a few examples in a little bit. And then digital skills. Another key piece of United Way work is around workforce development. We know most jobs in the state of Texas require at least moderate levels of digital skills. A National Skills Coalition kind of 2020 scan of the country found up to 1 in 3 workers have no or limited digital skills. And so that's the digital skills gap that we see when we're talking about workforce development. That's what we're really interested in tackling to ensure that Texans have access to these living wage jobs that are going to move them on a path of economic mobility. So that digital skills piece is key for us. And I think when we were kind of talking earlier and we were talking about points of entry into this work, and talking about nonprofits specifically, in every community, there are programs that touch inclusion, whether they're doing it explicitly or they're doing it implicitly. And I'm thinking of, when you're doing, if you're a healthcare navigator, you're working in digital inclusion work, right? If you're doing early childhood work that does financial stability programs, they all touch on this work. There are all these access points. And so we can get creative about when we think about solutions to inclusion. Where can we look to? What nonprofits in the community are doing this work? How can we integrate more inclusion information in all of these touch points? I was in Longview yesterday talking to their board and the United Way there, and they were wanting to plan for education for the next 3 years. And everything they talked about was about the digital divide. And they were trying to solve an education problem. They're like, not all of our kids have a device. A smartphone is not a high quality device, right? Or they don't have the internet at home. They were solving education problems, but they're also solving inclusion problems. And the more we can see those kind of wrapped holistically, then we can see broadband cutting across these issues. I think the better off we'll be, because this really does have the potential to strengthen our communities. And so that's that's really what brings United Ways to this work.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm curious, partnerships has been a theme of today. How are your statewide organizations really making partner work more visible? In both your cases, you're working with place-based groups, they're piloting, they're innovating. How are you sharing that example across your network so everybody can learn from it? Love to hear from both of you.
Sure. So from the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, part of our role is to ensure that we're sharing the knowledge of the folks in the field, the folks that are actually doing and implementing the work. So through our pilot programs, we have a few different cohorts of grantees, and we're getting together at these monthly meetings, and we're sharing out that information. We also have a number of people that serve on our grant review committees, and so they're able to actually see what work is happening within the field and advocating for others to get involved. One interesting thing that has been very grassroots driven from our very enthusiastic library folks is that they are very invested in their communities, and they're also invested in each other's library success. So I was just talking to a librarian in Lake Hills yesterday, and she gets together once a month with 19 other library directors, and they go out to lunch, and they call it the Brain Trust, which I think is adorable, but also awesome and empowering. And they talk about the things that are affecting their community. And so there are not only from the top down, so of course TSLAC wants to feel like we're supporting our librarians in the field to know best practices and share those, but there's also a lot of grassroots talk happening in the field. And so I think for us, it's important that we're sharing out from the top and also elevating from the bottom. And so a lot of our programs have both of those components. We want to make sure that we're showcasing best practices from the field, and also it's important for us to lift up the voices. You'll hear later from Diane Connery, who's a librarian in Pottsboro doing amazing work as well, and hearing from our librarians the work that they're doing, they're getting a spotlight as well. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay, good.
Of course.
Perfect. And yeah, I think that for us, we really do see nonprofits really leading the way on digital inclusion. And many of these nonprofits in the ground have been doing this work way before we were all talking about it at the state level, way before the kind of pandemic put a shining light on it, that they have been there doing the work, and we have really looked to them to learn and to see what's happening. And so I will put on my nonprofit advocacy hat for 1 second, because part of our United Way work, that our nonprofits, they experienced fundamental shifts in the way they operate because of the pandemic, just like we all did, just like government and schools and other organizations. And they are still working to kind of reevaluate. They've had to, provide different services than they've ever had before, serve people differently, engage with volunteers differently, who are a big part of their workforce. And when we surveyed the sector in late 2020 about COVID impacts, almost 60% of nonprofits in the state said they had issues going remote. And that was issues with employees, getting them up and running remote, issues with volunteers, issues connecting to clients in their community and having to really reevaluate how they do things. And so I would just, as the advocacy voice of this, say that both nonprofits are critical community infrastructure, and we need to be thinking about how they are connected in all of these plans. We're talking, anchor institutions, libraries, food banks. These are all people who are playing really important parts in closing the digital divide. What are we doing to make sure they're connected? And then also looking at how their credibility in communities, the trust you were speaking about. I think that they are that connection, that voice to community. We're talking about, as the state level, talk to cities, talk to counties. It's also cities and counties in the state, talk to community, talk to the people on the ground that are experiencing this. I know just this week, our United Way of Austin coordinated with the city, and they were holding listening sessions similar to the ones we had at the state level, and inviting community to tell them, what are the challenges? What do you need? What do you want to see in our local plans? And so I think building up that capacity and listening to the voices of nonprofits and the communities that they are so embedded in is really critical to do that. And so a few key things that we have seen that we're really trying to help make visible and have informed a lot of our thinking around this. One has been device distribution. That's been a huge part of nonprofits' work. That was the first thing people came to United Ways about. for the pandemic related to technology was how do we get these devices out quickly? And nonprofits have the networks, they have the ability to move fast in the way that other types of entities don't. And they know they have these existing programs, so they know where the needs are. So looking to them for that. I think our nonprofits are working on that adoption journey, as we would call it, where we're working to move people right on their access and use skills. And what are we doing? I've seen a lot of nonprofits, United Ways, not United Ways. I'm calling them customized technology bundles. They're talking to people and they're saying, what do you need? Oh, you need a device and a way to pay for it? We can do that. Someone else needs digital skills, and a hotspot. Like, what are the exact things that you need? That's something nonprofits are really well positioned to think through and address on that micro level. And the last thing I'll say on it is affordable internet information. I know we've heard a lot about the different programs today, but state associations and local United Ways are really trying to get this information out as far and as wide as possible. And what they're doing is they're looking at existing programs, are the health coverage outreach people, voluntary income tax assistance via the tax sites, schools, what are the places we're already interacting with community and giving out information, and how do we integrate affordable internet information into those systems. And I think, I couldn't be at United Ways of Texas and not talk about 211 for 1 second. But 211 is another great way to get that information out. You can call 211, talk to a live person, and share what your barriers are, what needs you have, and they have a directory of faith and community-based resources. They're able to connect you, whether it's a device issue, whether it's a subsidy issue, whether it's low cost and no cost digital trainings in your community. And that is really a model for getting information out. And it's a model that we've used for a long time with low income electric bill payment support, using 211 as that resource. So thinking through some of the existing structures that we have, and really try to leverage those to address inclusion as well.
Thank you. I love the idea of a customized technology bundle. I think that says it all. And I wanted to underscore, what you're saying, that in our program, we observed how important it was to continue, actually, even post-pandemic, to offer some operation budget for the nonprofit to scale their connectivity technology access, even as they're providing that exact same support to their client population. So it does work hand in hand. Some wonderful examples there. Cindy, I would love for you to build on examples. What are some of the standout examples from your digital navigator pilot across Texas with the libraries?
Well, I'm really glad that you mentioned the customized bundles, because I hadn't thought about it like that at all, but that is a lot of, one library in particular, Dublin, the community where Dublin Dr. Pepper used to be created. No longer, I'm sorry, it's moved. But Dublin is part of our digital navigator pilot. It's a community of about 1,200 people, and the librarian there is the digital navigator. She's been taking on a huge scale of work and has been working tirelessly to connect with other community partners. And one thing that she's doing is working with a women's shelter. She's working with the food pantry. She's organized community, basically like a community organization and market, so that everyone's coming in and sharing their ideas. And for her, because her community is so small, she is able to work one-on-one with the participants to ask them what it is they need. Do you need an Apple laptop? Do you need an iPad? Do you need a tablet? And work hand in hand with that to make sure that device is there, the skills are there, and she can also train the community-based organization as well in some of those local resources. We have a few libraries also representing, so I want to shout them out. They're in the room. Emmy Johnson from Austin Public Library is here, as well as Diane Connor, who I mentioned, and Nikki Storr and Morgan Tam from the Wilson County Libraries are here. So I want to highlight Austin Public Libraries work with, they're actually also in our telehealth program, and they have created a wraparound service. So they're actually infusing their digital navigator pilot with the telehealth pilot, and they're working with the Housing Authority in addition to a bunch of other community-based organizations to ensure, again, that the folks have the devices, the skills, and the resources for long-term support. We're also working with 2 libraries in the Valley, and this has been a really one of which we talked about earlier today, the folks in Brownsville, which in 2019, Brownsville was one of the least connected cities in the United States. So Brownsville is part of our Digital Navigator pilot. And they've been doing an incredible job, which I really also want to mention this because I think we've talked very broadly about supply chain issues, but a lot of the things that I'm seeing on the ground for some of our digital navigators is actually the procurement process. And the folks in Brownsville highlighted how incredibly difficult it's been to actually, and they've been very creative, but how incredibly difficult it is to actually meet the needs because so many of the local procurement processes have been very challenging to communicate why and how some of these devices need to stay with individuals over a long period of time. Rather than for libraries, we work usually on a lending model, and that's been a challenge to communicate. But also multilingual support for digital literacy skills, and the communities there have been doing a wonderful job, but there are just not enough digital literacy materials out there that are provided in the languages that most Texans speak, and that would be Spanish and Vietnamese. So I just want to throw that out there as two ways that our libraries are really rising to the challenge to meet some of these individual obstacles, and I would encourage folks as you consider the next steps to think about those two opportunities.
Molly? Examples that are really
Sorry.
stand out. Yeah,
I was like so involved with Cindy's story on like all of these great things happening on the ground. I think for us, kind of the one example I'll point to that really has stood out as part of our work, kind of beyond what we've been seeing on the ground that I alluded to a little bit ago, but one of the key things, and I will touch on it because I think it's been touched on maybe the least today, was really the workforce development piece and the digital skills. So United Ways of Texas leads the National Skills Coalition work in the state, which is Texas Works Here. And that's a coalition of employers, advocates, some state agency folks who are all really focused on improving workforce development statewide and what that can mean. And so that advocacy agenda has included digital skills, those occupational digital skills that we know that people need for these high-wage jobs, these tech jobs that are coming into the state. And it also includes advocacy around supportive services and access to broadband, just generally having a device, ability to, study at home, those types of things that are really important for students to have as they're going through workforce development programs has been a part of that too. And so one of kind of the key wins we've had with that coalition, to really highlight an example, is last session we had a couple of budget riders that allowed federal workforce dollars coming into the state to be spent on programs that include digital literacy as a part of that curriculum and training. And it also allows, because there's a lot of rules around what you can and can't use devices for, allows you to use those devices for digital literacy training as well. So thinking creatively about funding streams that are already available in the state, how can we expand their allowable uses, how can we braid these things together so that we can really ensure that we're targeting the digital inclusion pieces that we're looking to do, I think is a key part of moving forward.
Yeah, thinking creatively. So we heard in the last panel, broadband is coming to Sabine County. Newton County is currently planning for broadband. Should we be working on adoption utilization strategies, even absent a broadband infrastructure solution? I think I know how you're going to answer this question.
Why, yes, of course. And I'll just sort of co-sign on what a lot of other folks here have said today. It's about that community engagement piece and making sure that that libraries and library staff are at the table when you're thinking about the folks that know their communities very, very well. As Dr. Ali said, hyperlocalism is just such a huge piece of what libraries do. Sorry, that is true. But a huge piece of what broadband infrastructure and implementation is going to be, it will need to be considered, and libraries are really key partners in all of that. So I think it's, to answer your question, yes, we're working on it. We should continue to work on it. And there have been things that, many community-based organizations have been doing to fill the gap, Wi-Fi hotspots being one, but we know those are just Band-Aids and we need more.
Yeah.
Molly, did you have anything to add?
I know, that was all great. I think that's just true. I think that seeing these issues as intertwined and connected, I mean, even in kind of some of the information coming out from the federal government about how we need to be planning for both simultaneously, that demand will drive the infrastructure. Like this is a circle, right? And just depends on where you are in the circle kind of getting there. And so I think that focus on inclusion should be a priority for all of our communities.
Great. So with just a couple of minutes left, what are the takeaways to keep this forward momentum for Texas, especially among nonprofit organizations and their sponsored networks?
Do you want to go first on that one?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple of takeaways. One, I hope that what's come out of this conversation and others today is that there are rich digital inclusion assets in all of our communities. There are people that are doing this work on the ground. We've seen so many bright spots across the state and work that's really going to be transformational. So just want to highlight that there's positive things happening across the state, and that to keep building that momentum, I think a couple things we're thinking about. Our state plans are going to be really important to really set a North Star for us to complement local plans and local work, especially that digital equity plan. And I think we're really looking to that to really be a key piece of this work at the state level, because the money that's coming is going to be transformational. I think we've all talked about that, heard that all day. So just thinking about how to prepare as we move forward, right? Let's keep finding these bright spots, thinking about ways we can scale or share, right? Replicate kind of across communities. That's a big focus of ours. Collecting clear data. I would say we don't have great data on a lot of the adoption barriers. We're, making some educated guesses based on, subscription numbers and things like that, but being able to drill a little deeper into what are the adoption barriers, knowing that could change between communities, even within communities, but thinking through data. And then for the nonprofits, again, I think preparing our community-based organizations to access and spend this money well is going to be important. I think we've seen with the American Rescue Plan, the CARES Act, that it's hard oftentimes for nonprofits, especially nonprofits, to contract with government. It's also hard for them to spend a lot of money really quickly sometimes. So what can we be doing now in these intervening 6 to 8 months before money starts going out the door to really prepare our nonprofits to be able to compete for that money, to be successful in that? And I think we've heard a lot of great strategies throughout the day. So I would just focus on those two pieces and just hammer home what we've heard. Partnerships are key, that we're all in this work, whether your mission statement or your strategies say digital inclusion or not, we're all in the work of digital inclusion.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. And Cindy?
I would just want to say I agree with all of that. And also just in particular, just to get creative with how we're continuing to look at our obstacles as real opportunities. There are just so many different ways that certainly libraries can be engaged, and I always want to speak to that, but just to make sure that we are engaging library staff to be at the table when we're talking about this. One thing I kind of thank you for bringing this up, is that there's a lot of data gathering that's actually happening at libraries at the local level. And we're also at the state level, the state library has also been working to gather speed test data over the past, I believe it's 6 years, from our libraries across Texas. So we've been able to incrementally show how libraries have risen to the challenge of meeting the community needs, but also it's a really great indicator of what is available in their areas. So I do want to just say that if you're interested in, or you're trying to find particular data about specific communities, libraries may also have that data for you. So please do reach out and see if they are collecting that data. The state level, the same case, we also are. I feel like everyone needs a better data management plan. I don't know if that's just me, but we have so much data that we could probably be sharing and pooling, and if there's a way that we can help increase better research methods in the future, then we want to be part of that. But yeah, I think that's probably it for me.
Okay, so those are the last words? Excellent. Well, this was informative and fun. Oh, and there are questions. Yes, we may have 1 minute for a question.
That's a great question. Yes, that is a key component. I think we're hearing more and more cybersecurity is a key reality for both for nonprofits in protecting their own data, but also for teaching populations. Yes.
And for libraries, are you aware of any library that is sponsoring events where they project these videos or showing you about phishing and all that stuff, and then have someone there to follow up, answer questions, and maybe more people to the audience? I would really like seniors with this.
We have a few. I don't know of anyone in particular of doing that particular where you're projecting the phishing, kind of scenario. But I do know that there are quite a number of libraries that are working on services to seniors in particular and doing computer classes with seniors. They might be going to senior centers to providing those classes. Again, I'll just name check Diane because I know that she's doing an intergenerational program, then she'll be speaking next. But there, especially with telehealth and telemedicine, it's going to be a really important crossover for our older folks that are getting online, perhaps for the first time. There are a number of what's that?
I had one to mention.
Oh, yeah. There are a number of online materials. Digitallearn.org is multilingual support. There's also Older Adults, which is sponsored through Senior Planet. There's just GCF Learn Free has a number of free online multilingual materials for people that need digital literacy skills. There's just a number. And Krista?
I was going to say our Digital Navigator program uses Literacy Minnesota's North Star Digital Literacy, but it took a couple of rounds of our Digital Navigator program for our community partners to say a training specifically on internet security and privacy was fundamental. And so we'll have Oasis Connections, which is a nonprofit organization that trains on this topic, joining the next cohort that kicks off in June. So maybe that's a connection for you. Thank you for the good question, and thank you all.
You too.